Hey guys, here I am again with the seventh part with Kassra Zargaran. Yeah. Ex-Health Angels Murder Year 9, we talked about that in the first part, but I don't want to limit it to just that. I also don't want to be reduced to being the ex-Nazi or something like that. You moved from Hamburg to Berlin into the Berlin scene. The Berliners had earned their reputation through massive violence on the part of the Bandidos, then over to the Hells Angels. Kassler, it's kind of weird when I talk about myself in the third person. Kassler is now riding a wave that others have created. Do you want to profit from that? Did you see a business opportunity? Or did you just say, no, these are the guys I've been looking for all this time?
Yeah, it just fit. I didn't see any business at all. I arrived clueless, without any idea or business plan. I needed to protect myself. With the heads and now on site, but actually it's the opposite. I left a lot of money on the table.
But no thought of business.
No, I was just excited. Yeah, exactly. I had gotten a taste for it back then, and I also lost a lot of money. I ended up with relatively little. I saved up a bit, but it accumulated again over time due to my lack of income.
It goes fast.
Gone, and then for the first 1.5 years, I really pinched pennies, and it was really hard. It was a big step back, maybe even several steps back financially. And then the second half, then on site, I started to get going. I wouldn't say I was in top shape, but I was doing well, yeah. And then I also found my way and built up my own things, but I never had potential. I mean, I didn't know anyone. There was nothing, no clue for me. Like, now I go there, I make money, but how? Selling drugs or what, there was nothing. I didn't just I had a business opportunity that required the Hells Angels involvement to work, but I had no leads. For me, it just seemed to fit at the time. Right in this Hells Angels flow through Kiel and all that, also with Hamburg, and it just fits there locally, and let's see where the journey goes.
It was really like this, I think everyone who was in the motorcycle scene, and that goes from motorcycle friends like Freerider, motorcycle friends, motorcycle club, and other 1%er clubs all looked to Berlin. Everyone was waiting every day to see what would happen there. And
something seemed to happen every single day.
That also brought a lot of media attention. Were you also partly proud of that? So now,
yeah, of course.
Suddenly, you became cardio, and everyone around you turned into public figures. Before that, rockers were kind of hidden. They existed, people knew Frank Hainbutt, but that's where it stopped. Nobody knew the Bandidos' leadership either.
Meanwhile, the two nationals released a book.
But
not in this quality and not in this context. Massive. I would say so.
You knew the people in
the scene.
But if I were to go out here in Lübeck now and say, well, I know this person and that person, no, Frank Hainbutt, sure, yes, and then suddenly...
I've already heard that question before, or just now, or the Persian guy here, betting office motor, so there's already more of a connection there. People have already paid more attention to it. Yes, that was just the time back then.
That's when you noticed it too.
Awesome, yeah, of course. Sure, of course the journalists on site were confronted, and I have footage where I talked to Spiegel Television, Thomas Heiser, greetings at this point, and Klaus Mauerhöher.
Tough guys who go where it hurts, yeah.
Yeah, those are journalists. They keep going where it hurts and aren't above anything in a positive way, so shout out to them at this point. I also got to know them very well afterwards in the second part of my life. But yes, back then they did a lot of reporting and also stepped up. And there were also confrontations. People kicked them and knocked the threatening camera out of their hands. So it was kind of an ambivalent relationship. Somehow you thought it was cool because people celebrated it, and that's actually why the charter was on everyone's lips. Because if no one was filming it, who would care? Or if the press doesn't report on it, then it basically doesn't happen. But in any case, on the other hand, when they were there, people would confront them, insult them, spit at them, whatever.
But I think that's an absolute paradox for me, and I always chuckle about it when I see it on television. It's especially big with the so-called lateral thinker demonstrations, with right-wing extremists, with
them.
Yes, like here at the Corona demonstrations or when right-wing extremists are demonstrating, they see a camera crew there, there's a cameraman, a sound guy, an editor or a female editor standing there, and they know they're being filmed right now. They approach them, harassing and saying, "Don't film me," while deliberately walking into the camera's view. You knew they had the camera on, so you walk up to them and try to kick them, but it's almost like you wanted to be filmed.
No, it just happened that way. They were there, and you noticed there were one or two reports and so on, and then you saw them again. There was a documentary where they even let them in after the patch over. Don't ask me why they did that. Then they walk through the halls at a location and they film Kadir, they film various other members. And from Midland back then, so North Rhine-Westphalia, and Frank Hamburg gives an interview, Henry Sommer gives an interview, and they comment on this patch over, more or less very limited, but they do comment. So they already opened the door there, and that was intentional, yes. And especially with our charter, it was like this. It wasn't like that before, but over the months and years, it became established that people were regularly photographed there. But at the beginning, it wasn't intentional. We didn't call and say, "Let's come on, let's set up a press appointment" or anything like that. They just showed up. Initially, it was unclear, but after reading the documentation, you celebrated it. They also put the president of our charter, no need for me to repeat his name 10 times, into the spotlight, and of course everything around it as well. On one hand, you liked it, but on the other hand, it was like, no, leave me alone, and main party. The head or whatever.
But he didn't think about it and said there were always statements also to the press and so on. Now he is our city.
And so on, and
wasn't there anyone who said, okay, this is too loud, we're challenging the rule of law, we're asking for bans, we need to tone it down a bit, we've got our status quo now, we've cleaned up, we've got our position. Didn't anyone ever say, let's take it easy now?
No, that wasn't the case. The leadership wasn't set up that way. They wanted that. They always wanted to be present. They wanted to do something. They needed action. They wanted to get into conflict. If anything, it was on an individual level, like take it easy with that big family. We don't want that right now. We're on good terms with them. It's not necessary. But in general, no one ever said pull back. They specifically recruited these kinds of people, so we were in a group made up of people like that. They didn't have any overthinkers or people who were too much in their heads. Mostly they wanted people who were warriors, who were soldiers, who had fought wars and more or less weren't too proud to do anything for the club and did everything, even up to killing. And because of that, it's not even possible to keep people like that, those kinds of characters, calm. It's only a matter of time, and he himself wasn't exactly the calmest person either. He always needs some kind of recognition and things to happen so he can show off with his character. He also had a reputation outside the club that he wanted to maintain, and there were always some issues. There was one, the vice president, Bulent from back then, the vice president, who always had a very de-escalating effect. He was very thoughtful, very smart, but basically that wasn't the general attitude. The general attitude was exactly the opposite.
Before we get back into your biography, you are just running with exactly, but I would still be interested to know, did you feel that Charter wanted to be the most extreme in all of Germany? Did people from the outside think, okay,
Or did they want to be and actually were?
right here, okay, that's what it was.
Yeah, so you wanted it, and that's how it was, both with the one you mentioned and now with the others.
Exactly. So we just said, how did people look at it from the outside, even when we talked among ourselves and had guests, no matter where they were from, even from the Hells Angels, and later we also had contacts with certain Bandido chapters. They said, no, not with them. So that was very clear. Yeah, of course. Those were always backroom conversations. I don't want to call anyone out here, but everyone said it, even within the club itself.
Say nothing?
Well, I don't think you were completely without criticism, even within the club, of course.
There were many who campaigned against us, many who looked up to us, and many who were afraid, many who had respect. And I especially wanted to reach the rural areas who thought very differently. And of course, we had many big city chapters from other cities who looked up to us, I would just say, and they said, wow, back and forth. Frankfurt was a chapter that was very well connected with us back then. And at times we had very good contact with North Rhine-Westphalia, and of course, at the end of the day, also with the Danish nomads, who are kind of the ultimate in the biker scene, both in Europe and worldwide. They have a huge reputation because of all the decades of wars they've had over many years and decades. And we got along very well with them, and they wouldn't have approached us otherwise. And we wouldn't have had that relationship if we hadn't had their respect. Alleged respect from that point of view.
So they were already looking like, wow, there are these guys in Germany now. Exactly, we got to know each other.
Specifically, the nomads also formed in a special way within Denmark itself. The nomads back then, that group doesn't exist in the same way today. I know from the authorities in Denmark, I have a good connection there now, that it's been permanently dismantled. It doesn't have the same quality anymore. Maybe just a few remnants of what it used to be. But back then, there were long-time members involved. People who did a lot for the club, multiple murderers, who served 15 or 20 years for the club, from the old wars of the 80s and 90s. Bullshit. Bullshit. Yes, exactly, and accordingly the reputation within the structures of the Hells Angels, the nomads in Denmark, and within those structures, the nomads were the absolute top, like the Champions League. That might sound very harsh, don't get me wrong, but just so you get a sense of what kind of
Category?
Ancardi looked up to that, which is why we had a very close relationship. I was in Denmark very often, and I always had a very close exchange with some people. And of course, for many, that was like a red flag, because then there's envy, resentment, and there are quite a few intrigues among the Hells Angels. And of course, you automatically move to the top of the hierarchy in food chain.
So then other charters start to notice and say, look, now he's with
The Danes and so on, and now they're even with them, and the nomads have almost nothing to do with the Germans. There was just a bit of overlap in Flensburg with Aarhus, with Grom back then. Because of the proximity, due to the proximity and your actions there, I can't say what it is, and I don't want to make any claims right now. But the fact is, there was a close exchange. I experienced that myself, and he commuted back and forth there regularly. And that's why, but the nomads weren't anywhere else in Germany. Maybe at some big anniversary parties, but otherwise they only visited us regularly back then. And those were members back then who already had a very, very high reputation within the organization. And they don't just go to random people who just say, Rudolph, go crazy.
yes.
Your dogs, and the ones that are kind of no names within the structure, that exists too, of course. Two,
The dogs belong here and are just a part of this place. Let them out. Not just shovel them away. And oh, Marissa is coming. That's why they're freaking out. And yeah. Okay, so that's already, well, it was clear about the Champions League. You want to be a part of it. You commute between Hamburg and Berlin. You also got along well. Was it generally like that you came in and said, okay, I get along with almost everyone here?
yes, that's really how it was, and that was very unusual. The formation of cliques is not unusual, especially in these structures. Lobbies even within the charter, and that was so unusual. But that was the chemistry there, and the energy you felt in the charter, it was very special. And that's why they were able to do things the way they did and present themselves outwardly like that, because the circumstances within the charter were just the way they were.
I was a bit surprised. We'd already sat together for 2 days, even late at night. Yeah. And there's one thing that stuck with me, and I specifically didn't want to talk about it because I didn't want to get ahead of it. And you said the group took it very seriously. Very seriously. And that's really strange because what we always heard, what was passed on to us was that, yeah, they don't care, nothing matters to them. It's all about motorcycles and clubs and so on. And you told it exactly the other way around.
Yeah, that's how it was.
But it's strange how then?
How then?
They may be trying to make someone look bad. He's just a troublemaker. They're just violent and, well...
I understand, you have to see, of course, they're all competitive animals, even within the clubs, and many chapters have looked really bad because of us. We had no competition in the city. The competition was really wiped out. No movement, there were no ambitions, especially in Berlin, in a city of millions, where there was a lot of potential for new structures. That has changed by now, but back then no one would have dared to start Mongols, any Satudaras, Bandidos, or any other street gangs or so, or gremium or whatever they're called, in that kind of quality. No, that would have been nipped in the bud. We received some information that the Mongols wanted to form up north. We visited a couple of bars in the area a few times, made our presence known, asked questions, and looked around, but nothing materialized from it. Satudara was also mentioned at one point, but it never materialized. From that perspective, numerous charters are founded alongside the Hells Angels, including Satudara, Bandidos, Gremium, and the Outlaws, among others. Brotherhoods, and of course that's not welcomed, that's why. And the Chartists didn't do anything. Of course, they're in a worse position.
And of course, they have to
somehow talk badly about what we're doing to the outside world. That means, just to clarify again for the people watching, this isn't about theorizing or trying to create some kind of legendary status around this whole story. We're talking about the situation back then and how things actually were in the structure, and that's just how it was at the time. And of course, a lot of people ended up looking pretty foolish as a result.
But coming back again to this life in it, so to put it simply, you were a motorcycle club.
Yeah, of course, there were motorcycles. Everyone had a motorcycle. There were regular rides. We went to the run at Balaton in 2013. We rode from Germany to Hungary all the way through. A ride? We did a complete ride there and back again. We used to drive around regularly, visiting the nomads with cars and motorcycles. During the season, we would ride, and sometimes the bikes were lined up outside, back when the clubhouse was still on Residenzstraße in Reinigendorf. For those who don't know, Resi, or Residenzstraße, is in Wedding, Reinigendorf. We had a huge clubhouse back then, 2 or even 3 stories, 1 floor downstairs, then another one upstairs, ground floor, and then the first floor. And outside, all kinds of Harleys were lined up, from fat boys to sportsters, night lords, and whatever else. And there was nothing about not riding motorcycles.
So the rules were actually lived by?
Yes, the president back then, that was important to him. He had 2 Hardys, he wanted to drive. He valued his 3 or 4 clients. He enjoyed riding motorcycles.
A completely different story from how many people received it? Yes, of course, sure.
That also occurred mainly in North Rhine-Westphalia, not here. Kadir was very, very important. He frequently discussed the club's history to help people understand it and stay informed. He aimed to identify the club's veterans. He told everyone about the Danes, the history of the Danes, the bullshit war back then, when Makrele was also shot by Jürgen Nielsen and all that. That's all. That was history back then for the people. It's club history and how it all started and all that. That was really, really important to him. We always said, now it's history lesson time again. That's what we called it when he would stand in front of the whole team and start sharing his knowledge about the club. That's what people should take with them. And they did.
So it was completely different from how the rumors reached us or many others.
Of course, some members didn't have a driver's license, but they were the minority.
Well, but that was clear to everyone. You can lose your driver's license, but you have to be there.
That's how it is, and that's how it was. All right, you're here now, so how should we imagine it?
You build connections by spending time with people and showing effort, even if it means driving a lot. They see you as a reliable person, despite having been in prison in Kiel and not making it in Hamburg.
He proved himself in conflict. Exactly, that's exactly what they're looking for. Exactly. So you can say, well, that fits. How does a conversation like that go, where it even gets to the point of, okay, come join our Hessian structure?
So after several weeks of staying in Berlin and various everyday events in Berlin, Paul Kadir came to me and said, let's have a quick talk, Persian. We went around the corner, we went for a walk, and he asked, what's your plan now? Do you want to stay here? Do you want to move up? What do you want? You've already been here with us for almost 2 months. Then I said, yeah, of course I want to go down that path. Obviously, I want to become an angel now. Then he said, okay, I obviously want to belong with you guys. Then he said, okay, what do you want to be? Do you want to become a supporter? Do you want to become an angel now? What do you not want to be? Of course you want to become an angel now. He said, okay, all right, we have a meeting today. Come ride with the guys, get in the car with one of the prospect hang-arounds and come along. Okay, all right. So later that evening, we got into the cars, drove somewhere towards Adlershof, and then sat outside at a restaurant. I had to wait off to the side with the Prospect hangarounds as they were only allowed at the... They couldn't join the member meeting initially, but were later brought in while I waited. And then they said, Pelser, come in here, so come here. I'll let him in again. We've made our decision. We're happy that you're here for now. You're a good guy. Everything fits. We talked to the guys. We'd be happy, or rather, we are happy to tell you that you'll become a hangaround. Welcome. Then everyone kind of not really jumped on me. That comes later. But they patted me on the back and said, hey, brother, you're the star, the best, Superman. Keep getting involved. Now you have to step it up again. Here's the patch. Get yourself a vest. And we want to see even more from you. It really began when I got my hangaround patch. The patch is red and white with the charter written on the left side.
That was the...
Initially, Berlin City was the official status.
Okay, this interview wouldn't be fair if I didn't say now the fascination of the evil, the fascination of the club, the fascination of being an outlaw, motorcycle gang, 1%er club. What happens in that brief moment when you're called in, you're told, okay, you get the chance, here's the patch. Describe what that feels like.
Yeah, of course, I was really happy. I was glad. I was really happy. It was recognition, all this back and forth. It cost money. It wasn't easy on site. And of course, you had to submit yourself as well. With our charter, we had a different approach. There were no menial tasks like collecting trash. We tackled the entire project differently. Nevertheless, of course, you also had to stand in for Spaniards, more or less, and do things that you normally wouldn't have done. But you still did it with conviction. They handled that pretty cleverly back then. People did it out of conviction, not obligation.
That is a clever way. Yes, exactly. Some people forget that. Maybe you can say something about it too. Charters and chapters of the Hells Angels and other big and small clubs often treat people very poorly, yet still expect them to become brothers later on. Exactly, that always backfires.
That can drag on for a long time. Something sticks with you, and those are the people who sometimes end up starting a revolution.
Yeah, and you also can't get the quality people you want for something like that. You can't recruit a warrior that way. The warrior will eventually betray and attack you, claiming it's enough. So it's only certain types of characters who would put up with that, and they wouldn't have fit into our charter. If you know what I mean. Maybe the viewers also have an idea of what I mean. That means you wouldn't have any... They all would have been submissive personalities because you can't let them be humiliated to the maximum like that. Suddenly you're there as a confident member with both feet on the ground, and then you start to... It doesn't work. There might be individual cases here and there, but basically those are just very submissive personalities and they wouldn't have fit in with us. That's why you take the path of getting closer, of brotherhood. It's like a kind of cult. Of recognition, of respect, which you then paid when someone was there for a club and got people to want to do it, not because they had to. That was very smart, very clever, but of course also all very predictable and very simple at the end of the day, and of course also very, very, very nasty, but that's just how it was, yeah.
But now you had drive. Yeah, I'd imagine that.
I had drive too, but now I've been rewarded, and that's why I thought, okay, now I'll take it a step further. And then I was told afterwards there was a meeting. Now the situation is that you have to move to Berlin. You need to have a gym in order to possibly take the next step. And then it was clear to me, okay, now I have to move. Now it's all or nothing.
Is that how you say it with a wife and child?
Back then, I explained it to her like this. Listen, sit down. I've been commuting a lot. I haven't been around much. I know I've been at home very little. That has to change, otherwise I'll leave. It can't go on like this. But I said, listen, let's move to Berlin, then I'll be home more, I won't have to commute anymore, I'll live near the clubhouse, it'll only get better because I'll be even closer. And she thought, okay, all right, then let's do it. Did it get better? No, on the contrary, it got even worse. I wasn't at home at all anymore. And then we found an apartment in Berlin pretty quickly, also near Residenzstraße back then on Büchsenweg in the back. And we moved, and then I was in Berlin. It all happened really, really, really fast. And then the path continued towards Prospect. So everyday life went on. I was at the clubhouse, bought a motorcycle, was at the clubhouse, a V-Rod, an old 2003 model. I got it from a former member back then. It was confiscated by the club because that was always the way when the motorcycles were taken if someone got kicked out of the club. And Grille back then is not the Grill from the Nomads, just to be clear for those who know him. It was a different Grill, and he had to be kicked out back then during my hang-around time. And then they said, here, we have a motorcycle, buy it. So I bought it, I sold my car and used the cash to get the V-Rod. But the bike stayed at the clubhouse the whole time because I didn't get the registration papers since he wouldn't hand them over. He once said it was somewhere in Spain, but I had a Harley, so the way was clear then. I moved and the way was clear for the next step.
Did it go pretty quickly for you?
Yeah, well, you have to be a hang-around for at least 3 months, and I was...
3 months and then, yeah.
3.5 months, that's what I did, yeah. And then I became a prospect. That happened really fast. I was only in Berlin after that, and it was all about living on the fast lane, the fast track, nightlife.
How did you guys do it? Was there some kind of ceremony or something when you reached that? Or was it more like, here's your patch and...
Yeah, when I was a prospect, we still had the clubhouse. That was just before it got banned. In 2012, the Berlin Ministry of the Interior, led by Henkel, a Christian Democratic Union politician, banned us. Interestingly, he now has his own podcast. He banned us with a prohibition order. A few weeks before that, I got the patch. It was during that time period, but I can't say exactly when. And that's when they got me and brought me up to the clubhouse's first and second floors. Then I went into the member room. There was a special member room, and they said, come on, come in here. And then I remember one of the guys pushed me in from the side and said, yeah, you got lucky, you bastard. And then they slapped me on the back, and then everyone jumped on me, and then they started hitting my legs, kicking and punching me. I wasn't seriously injured, but you did have a few bruises, and that was just a kind of welcome greeting, like, welcome, and here's your prospect now. And that was another step where I realized my journey was changing, bringing me closer and closer until I finally arrived. And then it just kept going.
How does Kassra Zargaran finance his life?
The first 1.5 to 2 years were very difficult and tight on money, as I mentioned. I also had some club classes then in addition to that. And as I said, like, I didn't get much from the club. It was more of a financial burden than a benefit. Occasionally there were jobs or guest lists at the door at XXX back then. It was from a brother from Ismail Sugar back then. The brother was a silent partner at XXX. He was also charged back then in the Expect Market case as a co-initiator, but he was acquitted. Rightfully so, because in my opinion, he had nothing to do with it either. And that's Jakob, and in that case, he naturally had a share in it. And then we worked at the door. I got the job here and there, some small things, but nothing where I really got a good opportunity. I said I had to do something reasonable because this wasn't working. The red light business was no longer an option, and I had no other options left. And the women were gone, so I ended it. That didn't work anymore either. It was just doomed to fail. They didn't really want to anymore either. And Berlin, no, and so on. And then I did security service training. At 34, I wanted to start my own security company, and...
Is that possible with a great past involving violence?
Yes, that worked, yes. At the time of the inspection, it was completely fine, as juvenile detention expires after a period, so from that perspective, it was also entirely acceptable. I did it and passed there as well, and that's when the first rumors started among the leadership at Kurdistan Democratic Party, like, what's this crap about? Back then, I did that with Ahmed Mohammed, who is one of the most well-known bodyguards in Germany. I think he worked with various super-Americans, superstars like Claudia Schiffer, so Germans, but also Americans. Wesley Snipes and Muhammad Ali and all the others. And still active today. And he had a security school in Berlin on the Kudamm. He also offered courses and trained people. And I did it with him. I had him for about 3 or 4 months. There were already negative vibes from Kadir towards me. I thought, what's this about? What's your intention with that? What is it and what's the point? That's not something you should do. Yeah, but I did it from the perspective of hoping that I could build something with DAWAS. And otherwise, I was just living day to day, earning a little here and there, but nothing really worth mentioning. And yeah, but that changed after about 1.5 years because I was always somehow able to do things and also make money. But drug dealing
Was never your thing? No,
I don't have the drugs. I just wanted to,
don't use, and
not either, no, not at all. For me, it was like, I wanted companies, I wanted to do business somehow, cars, family, singing, construction. I just wanted to get into this business world and not make myself self-employed again. Continuing with prostitution just wasn't something sustainable, that's obvious. So I wanted to do that. And then I had the opportunity through these security jobs that I got. I was given them, and I often did security on construction sites. And then several times. And that's how, through an acquaintance who also did that, we ended up, if you do a good job, word gets around. And then we were lucky. Back then, we had a big contractor who had several construction sites in Berlin. We caught his attention, and he needed people he could use for himself from time to time. We're also talking about illegal money and things like that. He said he'd like to use me for more work in the future if things work out, since I'm a good guy. That's okay. And then we started working with him, helped manage his first construction companies, did business, acted as foreman, took care of the money, and made sure the companies were running, more or less. And that's how I got into the business.
That's when I started making money. Yes, that's when
I also started making money. Of course, I also met a woman back then who was also working a bit in the bread business, but it was manageable. But then I really got into this construction business and built some really good contacts, which made the management turn up their noses. How has he managed to meet such influential people in just a few years in Berlin while I haven't come close despite living here for 30 years?
that's actually a shame, isn't it? Yeah, totally. Normally you'd think people would say, hey, good for you.
Yeah, but that's the structure.
Yeah, of course, brother, sure. And we'll definitely get back to the term brother and what it actually means or doesn't mean. Yeah, and then it just started. I just wasn't at the club that much anymore. But I'd like to go back to earlier for a moment. Yeah, please.
you were a prospect then, and pretty soon after that, the ban came. How was it for you when the signs were taken down just a day before?
Yeah, there was a tip from the nomads back then. I mean, that's how it was, right? There was a tip from the nomads that something was coming. And that apparently forces are being gathered nationwide in Berlin, and you is supposed to be banned. That was very specific. And then they said, okay, look, we dissolve ourselves beforehand because you can't ban something that no longer exists. And then a day or two before, we started taking everything down. Money was put away, patches were hidden, everything that was important and could really hurt the club was removed. And then I think 48 hours later, there was a press release which we gave through Django. Django is the spokesperson for the Hells Angels Germany, just for the viewers' information.
A very long-serving Hells Angel as well.
Yes, he was from Hamburg and Bremen back then. And it was just like that. The following night, then they carried out the prohibition order and went everywhere. All the houses and all the apartments that had any connection to the Hells Angels from us.
During
You too, Clubhouse? Yeah, sure. And those were all from Bavaria, North Rhine, Westphalia, Thuringia, Northern Germany, and so on. You know what I mean? And yeah, the tip was definitely accurate, also with the incoming forces gathering there, and then they confiscated everything that Bezukurser had that was similar. They stripped the clubhouse bare, leaving only the floor, and likely would have taken that too, if possible. Chairs, tables, motorcycles, of course, they took out the whole kitchen, toilets, sinks, everything that was economically relevant in any way, and everything so that...
Did you guys actually not handle that so well? I already secured some things, but it was still banned, yeah, and...
Still went through with it, yeah, of course.
Berlin.
Berlin City was banned, yeah, it was shut down in 2012 in the spring. Shortly after that, there was an event in Austria, in Graz, and then people said, okay, well, that was obvious, you can't just get rid of everything. We didn't expect them to take a table and chairs, what do you want with that? But I think it was also about economically undermining the charter somehow, and you could have the clubhouse belonging to Akim, a former Bandidos member, was also confiscated. And it was registered to him, and that's why they couldn't confiscate it, because he
wasn't affiliated with you. Was rent paid? Exactly, it was.
Rent paid, that's why it's difficult. And he also had nothing to do with those people anymore. Yes, it has to...
Have boundaries too. There have to be boundaries, yes. Yes, you can.
You can twist it legally in court. They also said, even if a car is financed and technically belongs to the bank, if someone uses it regularly, you can assign it to them and then they can take it. So you can do that, but in this case, it just wasn't possible. And yeah, then that was it.
2 questions. How was that for you? As a prospect, you're excited about Berlin City, a top-notch Champions League club. But then you find out the club is banned, the name is gone, and somehow your prospect status and vest are gone too, at least for now. Was that already a blow?
It was a small cut.
Something human needs to be taken care of.
Something you need to take care of, human.
Yes. And 2 questions? Yes, of course.
So it was like you were about to somehow,
Yeah, I'm a prospect. Then the ban comes.
somehow that really affected you?
Yeah, that affected the whole club. We also lost a lot of people because of that. It really hurt the club immensely. It never really recovered from it, not even from...
The manpower side. So, is it a tool of the state?
Sure, of course. That's why it makes sense to ban the charters if you want to stop all this influx. Remember, you know how it goes. The structure is mafia-like and built exactly the same way. It's military, hierarchical, with all these commands and sergeants and everything. But these days, there's a significant difference between the mafia and these structures. The mafia prefers to keep a low profile and avoid public attention. There's John Gotti, the best example of how that can backfire, and now it's exactly the opposite. They display their crimes to the outside world, they show off what they've done for the club, they show to the outside world, in various cases, what roles they have, that they belong, what status they have, and that they belong at all, and what status they have as well. And of course, that's anything but quiet. And when you take away this basis for outward representation from such people, it really hurts. And many people are eager to show off and celebrate their things to the outside world. And I'm someone here who still identifies with that, and that's where the influx is fundamentally interrupted, it will never completely dry up. No matter how many police officers you recruit and put to work, you'll never be able to completely change crime. Even in dictatorships where there is no rule of law, there is crime against the state. In those cases, the state is usually the criminal. However, there is still cheating, stealing, and murder. So that doesn't mean anything. It's more about limiting the possibility of presenting this image in public to suppress this picture and put a standard photo in its place. That made sense. The influx is not as big as it was back then. Their manpower is not the same as before. It's not like that anymore.
Did people really get into it back then?
Yes, of course, especially a lot of people in our area. We suffered significant losses in the supporter study with nearly everyone leaving. So really almost everything. With no new members, the clubhouse ceased to exist, leaving nothing for them to flaunt to the outside world. First of all, and a lot of that has fallen away. And I also know that back then, Kadir was really unsure about it. He didn't know where things were headed either. And it was also a very turbulent time, because we ourselves didn't know. It wasn't clear what kind of prohibition order it was. Is it a prohibition order just for the charter or also for the successor organization? In Kiel, it was like that. Not even 3 members were allowed to gather at once. Stay together, but only 2, otherwise it would be considered a successor organization, a criminal offense. And we didn't know any of that, and then we regularly went to Cologne. Back then we met with Lutz Schellhorn, who was the former president of the Stuttgart chapter. I think he's no longer the president of the Stuttgart charter today, but already a prominent figure within the structures, very experienced, and in our opinion at the time, somewhat knowledgeable in all this association law. And then we went to the run, the World and Euro run, which takes place once a year, and we went to Austria, to Graz. We then presented him with the prohibition order, asking him to review the situations and discuss how we could reorganize and progress. Club life must continue, people don't simply vanish. And they said, no, I don't see any ban on successor organizations here, and no general HMS ban, just the charter. And I also don't see anything about 2 people succeeding together. I said, okay, so the 3 or 4 of us went to Cologne back then, and I was there too. There was a meeting between the lawyer and them, which I wasn't part of, where they said, to go ahead and reorganize. There are no restrictions. You can be together, go out and celebrate together, be seen together, be out together in a room. That doesn't exist. It was probably also procedural errors or missed opportunities on the part of the authorities. Maybe they thought about it or weren't able to yet. I don't know what the legal situation was at the time. The federal states sometimes have different laws. And yes, then we just said it's clear. Then he took a month or two to reflect and came back to the playing field with 4 new charters. Northtown, Southtown, Easttown, and Westtown. North, South, West, and East Town all distributed. All distributed, and that's...
Actually, how many people were you?
The Hells Angels and their supporter structure remained intact, as we were exactly the same.
Broken down, how many Hells Angels were you? 40? 40? That means 10, 10, 10. With prospects and everything included, yes.
Okay. And accordingly, we came back in full force, and it hit like a bomb. So, from the authorities' side and so on, they were, that's something I know now after the fact. When you hear all the comments from the officers, since I'm still in contact with them and have a good exchange, they also reminisce about that period, admitting they were going in circles in disbelief of the situation. What kind of mistake happened there, that things turned out like that?
Actually pulled back now. We've divided Berlin. Yeah, more or less. Sure, there's the waiting area you clear out.
At first, when you return with 4 new charters, it raises the question, what's happening?
But it was still clear 4 charters at the top still stand. Of course, sure. He can't be president of 4. So it was a paper tiger.
It was a paper tiger, well, either way. So he wanted to set up a clubhouse in every direction of the city. But of course, under his leadership, Northtown was established on Meteor Street in the north. Back there at Kutschi in the north, towards Tegel. And then we checked out the clubhouse in Nukon and the south, so there was already some planning involved.
Now really strong.
To come back, but he didn't have the time because then all those things happened. But it was in the works, it would have happened. The clubhouse was, we got a new clubhouse. It was then rented on Meteorstrasse. It was a house with 120 square meters and with a yard. And I think it still exists to this day. Or they issued another ban order in 2020-22, something like that. And the clubhouse was searched again then, so it still existed at that time.
Okay, but you're still in prospect status for now. Exactly, in prospect status. The second question I had, before we move on to your further career, the second question is house search. I promised my wife and my daughter that we're moving to Berlin. There's a new life. I'll be there more for you. And what you offer them is a house search.
Police, trouble, do you feel remorse or guilt for having done something like that to your daughter's children as well?
The woman can decide that for herself, being old enough. Yes, indeed. You can't blame yourself for that. You have to be honest with yourself and consider that maybe you don't want this anymore and need to break up.
Do you mean now in hindsight?
Sure. You can describe both perspectives.
Back then
It didn't interest me as I lacked that perspective. I lacked empathy. They lost relevance to me.
Damn state.
The state, anyway, and family life wasn't even there anymore. That was just club life. I don't know how it was for you back then. For me, the club was number 1, and nothing else came close for a long time. Eventually, a child and family came. And a wife. So it wasn't like I had blinders on, that's just how it was. So it was more like a visor, targeted, often aimed, but with millimeter precision at the club. There wasn't even a sheet of paper in between. So from that perspective, it wasn't like that at all. Like, yeah, sit down, here's some money, what do you want? You know? And there was nothing came between us. And now, in hindsight, of course, obviously, like you said yourself, she could have broken up. I still don't blame her because, of course, she was in love and she was loyal back then and just didn't want to let go and also hoped that I would get back on track. I totally understand that. I don't blame her for it. You can do that, but I don't blame her, like saying you could have broken up, it's not your fault.
I understand it wasn't meant as an accusation, but totally legitimate.
But of course, I also knew how she thinks, and of course, she didn't give up hope, but it totally backfired. And for the little ones, of course, it was the maximum. The trauma she experienced, including my final arrest and everything that came with it, I can see today that it still affects her, even in her development. I feel extremely sorry and have completely failed as a father. And as I said, I already mentioned this before. I don't know if we talked about it here in the interview, but we've both often philosophized privately about certain things since we have a lot in common. Children are, to the greatest extent, the responsibility of their parents when it comes to their development. And everything that doesn't work out there can be traced back to the parents.
Then this life police, then this...
Life, police, and the child are products of my actions. So it's very tragic, very sad, and I'm trying somehow to make up for it. Now, the relationship between us is extremely strained and troubled right now. She still hasn't worked through many issues, making it very challenging at the moment. And to this day, we don't really have any contact. Still, I believe her moment will arrive in time.
Maybe sometimes a little water just has to flow down the Elbe.
Yes.
Not just water, but possibly an entire ocean in this case. Someday, the ocean will also vanish. I hope she can find inner peace just as I have. And that we can treat each other normally again because we have a child together, you know. And that's always the case, you know, now that you're with your Jordan and all. It's always the little ones who suffer, the ones we're supposed to protect, who have no influence over anything. And we're the two who aren't responsible. We're not carrying the child.
Kassra, a wild ride, everything mixed up, a very, very fast, exhausting life, which we'll get to again in a moment, and probably your jump into membership as well. How that went, so thank you very much again for your openness about Gate 10 with your daughter. Give credit where it's due. Comment if you want. If you dislike this, consider why you're still watching. There's something worthwhile here. So leave a thumbs up, thumbs down. Check out the book. Kassra Zargaran, the Persian. The book is linked below. Order it for yourselves. It might be available in the shop with a signature. Perhaps we can arrange something. I'm glad you're here. Kassra, thank you for your openness. Toby, behind the camera, thank you too. As always, I say ahoy from the coast.